Welcome to Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange community, where leading practitioners in integrative health approaches will discuss how they solve the most challenging and common health issues. These regular Q&A discussions are designed to take a deep dive into case studies and integrative approaches in order to elevate the collective knowledge of both experienced and new practitioners alike. Biocanic's Health Intelligence Exchange, your community for functional medicine.
All right. Welcome to the Health Intelligence Exchange, everyone. I'm Jeremy Maleka of Biocanic, and today our guest is Dr. Stephanie Venn-Watson, veterinary epidemiologist, public health scientist, and co-CEO and co-founder of C15. Stephanie's background is anything but ordinary. She spent 2 decades studying dolphin health for the U.S. Navy and previously tracked diseases for both the CDC and the World Health Organization. It was work with dolphins that led to the discovery of C15, a fatty acid now backed by over 100 peer-reviewed studies and 70 patents, and recognized as the first essential fatty acid to emerge in over 90 years. Today, she's here to have a talk about what C15 means specifically as an emerging essential fatty acid, and to explore C15's role in supporting cardiometabolic health, liver health, and what practitioners can start doing with this research right now. Stephanie, welcome to the Health Intelligence Exchange.
Jeremy, great to be here. Great to be here.
I'm glad I got through that without jumbling up the word.
Hey, you got veterinary epidemiologist. That's usually the one that trips people up. So you knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. So you're probably the first person that has an origin story that starts with dolphins that we've ever interviewed. So let's maybe walk through how studying dolphins kind of led you to discover C15.
Right. I mean, the best discoveries sometimes come from accidents, right? So we weren't looking for a next supplement to launch out into the world. My job, as you had shared, as a veterinary epidemiologist, was recruited by the Navy to help us start and lead a clinical research program to continually improve the health and welfare of the Navy's dolphins. The Navy has this sustained population of about 100 bottlenose dolphins. They live in the open ocean, so they're not in pools. They're out, go out into the open ocean every day. They choose to come back. It's really an incredible, wonderful environment. And because the Navy takes such good care of these dolphins, Jeremy, they live a lot longer than dolphins in the wild. Dolphins in the wild live to about 20, while dolphins at the Navy are routinely living 40 to 50 years old. 2 dolphins last year turned 60. And so what we found was this is over a period of about 10 years, my first 10 years there at the program, we found that about 1 in 3 older dolphins were developing something that's going to sound really familiar to this audience, right? And that is a cluster of conditions tied to metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. They were also getting high cholesterol and triglycerides, chronic inflammation, fatty liver disease, our non-alcoholic form, and then even the full suite of changes consistent with Alzheimer's. So we were funded by the Office of Naval Research, wonderfully, just to help improve the health of the dolphins, to apply metabolomics. We looked at thousands of small molecules present in their archived serum throughout their lives, as well as their all fish diet, and looked for which small molecules predicted the healthiest aging dolphins. And that's where we made the surprising discovery that C15, or pentadecanoic acid, an odd chain saturated fat, predicted the healthiest aging dolphins. So fast forward 10 years, 100 peer-reviewed studies since that initial discovery. And Jeremy, like you shared, C15 is now emerging as the first essential fatty acid, a foundational nutrient that we need in order to slow our biological aging and stem the onset of the diseases that kill us, what's called a geroprotector. So go Dolphins.
Awesome. I have a buddy that would really appreciate that.
Or not, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just thinking maybe it'd be beneficial for the audience to just talk about what fatty acids are and what they may be more familiar with, and then we can put it in the context of C15.
Yeah, a great point. So fatty acids are, if we talk about, let's talk about dietary fatty acids. So when we talk about macronutrients in our diet, right? So we have proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. So within the lipids group are fatty acids. The ones with which we're most familiar with are omega-3s and omega-6s, so our omegas. Those are polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they're called so because their chemical structure means they have double bonds in their chemical structure, which allows them to bend. It's why they're oils at room temperature and helps make cell membranes flexible. In general, fatty acids play a core role in our membrane health. Many of them are anti-inflammatory. They help with cellular signaling. These are really important molecules. And when we require certain types of them from the diet called essential fatty acids, those are the ones that we really need to pay attention to because our bodies can't make enough. C15 is a saturated fatty acid. So we've been taught right since the late 1970s, all dietary saturated fats are bad. We now absolutely know that odd chain saturated fats, which are fatty acids that have no double bonds and have an odd number of carbons in them, 15, 17, these are odd chain saturated fatty acids, that these are beneficial, while even chain saturated fats, those with even number of carbons, especially C16, have the opposite effect, a pro-inflammatory, increased risk of various diseases. So that was your quick fatty acid 101 lesson on where C15 is in this world.
And I think you kind of briefly touched on this, but in the intro, we talked about the 70 patents and 100 peer-reviewed published studies now. So for practitioners who are new to C15, how does it really differ? What makes this fatty acid different from what we've seen in the last 90 years?
Right. So C15 of all these different types of, even if you look at milk fat, for example, it has 400 different fatty acids in it. So there's a lot of fatty acids out in the world. C15 has really come out excitedly as this Goldilocks dietary emerging essential fatty acid. And what makes it unique is kind of what I touched on, but then we can kind of solidify here, which is that C15, it's a molecule that we need to get from our diet. Our primary source of C15 from our diet is milk fat, so full fat dairy products. And if we don't get enough C15 in our diet, then we have found that it can make our cell membranes more fragile. We'll go into more detail about this. And now there's increasing evidence that it can even lead to a nutritional deficiency syndrome, which would be like when you think about, a vitamin C deficiency and scurvy and vitamin D deficiency and rickets, that the studies far beyond our own are increasingly supporting that as our C15 levels have gone down in our diet because of our decrease of dairy fat, this is potentially resulting in fragile cell membranes, a whole new form of cell death called ferroptosis that was discovered by folks at Columbia University. That C15 deficiency is causing this new form of cell death and leading to a deficiency syndrome, the first to be discovered in 75 years. So hence our urgency of being able to get science out there. We've published papers, but more importantly, others around the world. There's been enough time since our initial discovery for the peer-reviewed literature to really play this out. And it's the totality of data around C15 that's helping to support and really build this robust, stable base of science upon which others continue to build.
Awesome. And then C15 activates, oh boy, PPAR alpha and PPAR, is that a sigma or is that a
delta?
Delta.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I gotta brush up on my my Greek character set. It's been a while. So C15 activates those two pathways directly connected to liver function. Can you break down what that actually means for practitioners trying to understand this mechanism?
Yeah, absolutely. So C15 is a pleiotropic molecule. So it does a lot, which means it gets around, right? It does a lot of things. It stabilizes the cell membrane. What I just touched on, we'll carry more on that in a bit. It activates AMPK. It inhibits mTOR. I know you all care about these mechanisms. What's really emerging as a core additional role is it activates PPAR alpha and delta. So PPARs are basically receptors that help, and they're considered the orchestrators of our metabolism and play a key role in our immune responses as well. They tend to be anti-inflammatory. They help to balance immunity. You'll all be most familiar with PPAR alpha activators. The most famous group are fibrates. So fibrates activate PPAR alpha. They're the positive control for looking at other molecules that have PPAR alpha agonist activities that helps to lower triglycerides, in some parts cholesterol as well. So in the liver specifically, when we look at fatty liver disease, one of the most coveted mechanisms of action with regard to fatty liver disease are PPAR alpha delta agonists, and that's because it provides a combination of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and antifibrotic activities. We've been able to show this not just through direct activation of C15 on PPAR alpha delta in a dose response fashion, but also being able to show that in animal models, the ability for C15 to address liver disease. We'll go through the pathophysiology of it with regard to how this is happening, but it also helps to decrease inflammation, fibrosis in the liver. This has been demonstrated by us as well as others in multiple animal models of fatty liver disease. There's a randomized placebo-controlled clinical trial in which it was with young adults that were 18 to 24 years old. They took 200 milligrams of fatty 15 per day for 12 weeks. And those who took the C15 supplement and got up and over what we're defining as a sufficient C15 level of 5 micrograms per mil, that group had a significant decrease in their ALT and AST, which was wonderful to see in this group of young adults with a history of fatty liver disease.
Awesome. So maybe just kind of connecting the dots between C15 and the markers you just mentioned in terms of liver health. Do you want to just define AST, ALT, and GGT?
Yeah. So aspartate, you're gonna have to correct me here if I'm wrong. Aspartate transaminase, alanine transferase, and then GGT, glutamyl, something or other. Right?
Yeah.
So these are the 3 liver enzymes, the 3 primary enzymes we use to really understand, is the liver functioning? As those levels go up, that is a sign of decreasing liver function of an angry liver. It's one of the first things that we saw in the dolphins, where beginning around in the early 2000s, we started seeing dolphins, this 1 in 3 dolphins, develop this syndrome. One of the key things we saw off the bat was an increase in ALT and AST.
Yeah. And just to kind of connect the dots here. So a lot of our practitioners are very familiar with kind of detox protocols, liver detoxes, bile duct activation. So kind of when we talk about kind of liver detox in those functional medicine terms, we think about phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. Where does C15 fit into that picture?
It's a bit of a side, so I don't want to oversell it from a detox standpoint, but it would fit in the second category, the phase 2, and that's because of its role in increasing SOD and being able to help with genes that and direct activity of lowering oxidative stress. So, but the C15's primary role is I'll share with regard to the pathophysiology of what we're seeing with regard to C15 deficiencies and the role that plays in the liver. And that'll help really understand, like, as healthcare providers, what you want to look for in your patients. That may be different than detox. Interestingly, though, I will say there are studies that have shown that C15 in rats, that it helped protect the liver against the negative effects of alcohol. So that would be an example of a study that showed that it had protective effects against toxins, but from an environmental detox standpoint, that's less of its selling point. So when it comes to pathophysiology of how we've gotten to liver disease, the hope is that what the dolphins shared with us is helping to unlock why non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, I'll call it the correct proper name of MASLD and MASH, that it's now called. Why did that show up? So Mayo Clinic, right, identified the first 30 cases of MASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis at the time. They published that work, and that was in 1980. Today, 1 in 3 people globally have fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic form, and 1 in 10 kids. So the question is, where did fatty liver disease come from? And it literally seemed to have shown up out of nowhere and is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing, chronic disease. What we saw in the dolphins, in the Navy dolphins, was that starting in the early 2000s, we started seeing the onset of the exact same pathophysiology or picture of fatty liver disease in the dolphins. We were able then to understand that in the dolphins, this happened as they had lower C15 in their diet, which weakened, made their red blood cell membranes more fragile. Those red blood cells, fragile red blood cells, were then engulfed by macrophages or Kupffer cells inside the liver. And when those Kupffer cells engulfed lots of fragile red blood cells, the corpses they left behind were iron. So we now had fragile red blood cells and fragile cell membranes combined with iron deposition that accumulated over time. When lipid peroxidation combined with iron, this resulted in the phenomenon now known as ferroptosis, that stemmed the onset and exacerbation of fatty liver disease. Iron and lipid peroxidation then seeds the body. Iron overload then seeds the brain, the heart, the liver, and the pancreas, resulting in systemic accelerated aging effects. Ferroptosis, which many of you may never have heard of, is this new form of cell death caused by fragile fatty acids in the cell membrane that then results in what I just described. We didn't know it at the time, but dolphins had not only taught us how ferroptosis is happening, but most importantly, the pathophysiology of it, but what was causing it, which was for them a deficiency in C15 of a change that had been made in their diet. So we're excited to be able to help people that if you're looking at patients, you're going to see an increase in red blood cell distribution width, or RDW, paired with declining hemoglobin and hematocrit. You're going to see hyperferritinemia, so increased ferritin. That's not because of inflammation, but because of increased iron deposition in the liver and other tissues. And then that's where those liver enzymes increase. As the ferroptosis then progresses to different parts of the body, that's then where you see the downstream complications of MASLD, MASH, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cognitive decline, and other. I encourage you to go look up ferroptosis. There have been over 20,000 papers written on ferroptosis since its discovery back in 2012. It's a hidden emergency that's happening, maybe present in as many as 1 in 3 people globally.
Mm-hmm. So I know you just kind of went through some of those liver health markers that you're looking for relative to iron function, RDW, AST, ALT. Is there a certain threshold by which you should intervene? Like, is there one markers that are more important than others? Trying to really think about how a practitioner should be looking at that comprehensive blood work that just came in for somebody.
Yeah, Jeremy, it's a great question. So what you're going to see, one of the earliest markers of this particular phenotype, right, and this is not the only cause of fatty liver disease. For the dolphins, it was one clean phenotype. This is going to be a subset of phenotypes of patients that are walking into your door. But what you'll see is probably the most important and most specific will be this increasing red blood cell distribution width of RDW, paired with potentially declining hemoglobin if their blood, their creation of new blood cells isn't able to keep up with the blood loss. But increased RDW paired with hyperferritinemia that is not explained by inflammation alone. Hyperferritinemia is a direct measure of iron deposition in the tissue. So those will be your earliest markers, and C15 levels. So you can test levels of C15. And I'll get into that in a second. Jeremy, I want to make sure I answer your question. Once you see a person who has high RDW or a trend of increasing paired with hyperferritinemia, it is time to intervene because it means that there's enough iron, excess iron being deposited in tissues that it's triggering this hyperferritinemia. This is, again, one of the primary things we saw in the dolphins, and we were able to fix the anemia. Anemia was completely alleviated by increasing their C15 intake, which then added significantly increased C15 specifically in their red blood cell membranes. And they gave away a really important clue, which is that our red blood cells need at least 0.2% or 5 micrograms per mil of C15 in our cell membrane in order to keep it stable. This is a threshold effect. This is what you would expect to see in a deficiency syndrome, right? If you need to have a certain level above this amount in order to not have this illness. So I'm very excited dolphins share that. That actually played out in the clinical trial. I just mentioned in 18 to 24-year-olds, as soon as they got up above that exact same threshold of 5 micrograms per mil, that's when we saw stabilization of red blood cells and improved lowering of those liver enzymes. So very exciting, findings in the literature.
Mm-hmm. And I got to ask a question. So when we think about fatty liver, right, we're typically thinking about diabetic, obese patient, crushing carbohydrates, drinking soda, eating gummy bears. What changed in the diet for the dolphins? I can't imagine they can get access to processed high glycemic food.
Yeah, that is exactly, you are spot on. So we published this paper on fatty liver disease in dolphins in the highly read journal of Wildlife Diseases. So I'm sure you all read that paper when it came out. So, and all of this is for the sake of the dolphins, right? Not for, the intent was not for human health. So we published that work, and Dr. Jeff Schwimmer, who is a leading gastroenterologist who started the first fatty liver disease clinic for kids. He's a pediatric gastroenterologist. So Jeff did read the paper. So he had to search anything that said fatty liver disease he wanted to know about. So that paper popped up in his email. He sent me a message saying, hey, I saw your paper, but I doubt it's actually the same disease. But could you send me some dolphin liver slides and let me take a look at them? And so we sent him 17 slides from 17 dolphin livers. And I'll never forget, he sent an email, and the title of the email is "We Are a Go." He's like, this is the exact same disease I am seeing in my kids. And Jeremy, he asked your exact same question. What is going on? Because it's not sugar, it's not gummy bears, it's not alcohol. How are dolphins getting the exact same disease? We've been working in parallel, but independently for the last 10 years, chasing this hypothesis that it's paired C15 deficiency in both dolphins and humans that have led to this, to the issue. Now, the dolphins don't drink milk, so they're not getting, so this wasn't because of you changing dairy. They don't smoke, they don't drink, like none of those things. They don't eat sugar. So what happened with the dolphins is up until the late 1990s, they were eating eulicon. They were fed eulicon, which is a super fatty fish. It's so fatty that you can dry the fish, put a wick in it, and alight it. And so it's called a candle fish because it's that fatty. That fishery in the late 1990s completely died out, so fished out. So the Navy then moved to 5 different types of fish, none of them as fatty as the eulicon were, and 3 of the types of fish they were feeding had 0 C15 in it. That then created over the next decade, basically an accidental experiment where some dolphins were getting basically a C15 deficient diet, while others were getting some C15, but not as much, for example, of dolphins in the wild. Same exact parallel experiment was happening on the human side, where we were decreasing our intake of dairy fat and seeing these fatty liver disease, ferroptosis, these same new diseases popping up in 2 different large brain, long-lived populations. It was I don't want to call it a happy coincidence, but it was a fortunate coincidence because of this unlock.
Yeah. It's a really super interesting story. I was like, just thinking about like all the fatty liver we hear talking about. I'm like, where in the hell would the dolphins get access to the card?
How does that work? Yeah. So, and it really seems to be, Jeff did a study. He showed that kids that have higher C15 correlated with lower fat in the liver. And then he led that clinical trial showing, gosh, if the kids, young adults can get their C15 levels through supplementation, get it up and over that same barrier, he then saw improvement in liver function. So we couldn't have asked for a better outcome in that particular study. And boy, if this is something we can fix, just by like correcting dietary wrongs and then being able to provide supplementation when and where it's appropriate, that's safe. Let's do that. let's go keep doing the science to be able to correct a wrong.
All right. So peeling back the onion on that, lipid peroxidation is one of the primary drivers of liver cell damage. So how does C15 uniquely protect those cells against the process, and why does that matter clinically? I think we kind of touched on the latter part.
Yeah, I mean, it really gets back to the core, which is this ferroptosis, right? So as when we went to cell biology class, right, we learned there are 3 ways our cells die: apoptosis, necrosis, and autophagy. So this discovery that Columbia University made of a fourth entirely new way that our cells die was published in Cell. Please go read the paper. It's Dixon et al. And they described ferroptosis, and this is their description of it, are fragile fatty acids in the cell membrane that, AKA lots of double bonds, that are susceptible to lipid peroxidation, so attacked by oxygen. That lipid peroxidation then combines with this free iron we just talked about. And when lipid peroxidation combines with iron, this results in massive reactive oxygen species that attacks the mitochondria and takes the cell down. This is a very distinct, when you look under the microscope, this is a very distinct, truly unique form of cell death. So with regard to C15, we now know, and we have done it. There are 4 models of this pathophysiology. It's dolphins, rabbits, TTA rats, and humans. Mice do not get this pathophysiology, which is probably why it's gone overlooked or undiscovered, because so much of research on fatty liver disease has been on mice. But regardless, what we now know is that C15 plays a core role because it is a stable, essential, or emerging essential fatty acid, readily goes into our cell membrane, and it literally serves as like bricks around our cell membrane that is not susceptible. It is highly resistant to lipid peroxidation, that is directly protecting our cell membranes against the first step of ferroptosis. And just by doing that, by having 0.2% or more of C15 in our cell membranes, that there is not ferroptosis, and we can fix the problem. Therefore, not lipid peroxidation. We don't have that iron deposition. It stops the entire process. And in these models, we see that indeed in mice, in rabbits, in the rats and rabbits, that where you could get, look at all the tissues, C15 supplementation in these models successfully lowered RDW, alleviated anemia, stopped deposition of iron in the liver, decreased lipid peroxidation, and lowered markers of ferroptosis. So it really is not only the slow C15 causing fragile cell membranes and ferroptosis and lipid peroxidation in the liver, but it's also the thing that fixes it. So, which is obviously most important.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about kind of like practical application. So practitioners seeing patients dealing with this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, sluggish detox, and elevated liver enzymes, and obviously have their existing supplement protocols. How do you kind of factor in fatty 15, C15 into that picture? Is it replaced? Is it complementary? Is it standalone? How would you kind of talk about that?
It's on the front end. So that first and foremost, C15 is incredibly safe. So it's in breast milk. Like, it's so essential that there's a whole nother, talk and conversation we could have about independent groups looking at C15's role as essential, as defined at birth, that we need if neonates don't get enough C15 from mom, they have poor growth and poor neurological development. That's been shown in animal models. That's paralleled in human prospective cohort studies following mom and baby pairs, infant pairs, moms who have less C15 get their babies less C15 through breast milk. And then those babies have associated lower body growth and lower cognitive development following them from years 3 and 6. Sorry, that was a sidebar. Oh my gosh, Jeremy, I forgot what the question was.
How does it fit in with an existing protocol for a practitioner that's working on that?
So it's on the front end. So it's core. So first and foremost, it is safe, right? And having this as a foundational part of a liver health protocol does not add any risk, and it has the ability to potentially fix the underlying driver for the disease, right? Or for this condition, for those who have this subtype or phenotype of fatty liver disease. If they have a different type of fatty liver disease that's not caused by C15 deficiency, C15 has enough direct activities, PPAR alpha delta, agonist activities. It lowers 18 pro-inflammatory cytokines. There's enough activities that it has that it can provide direct protection in the liver. That would be complementary to milk thistle, for acetylcysteine, for other things that you might have in your protocol. Even looking at protocols for ferroptosis, a lot of them are antioxidant and iron chelator types of therapies. They're meant to address the downstream components, while C15 can hopefully help with the upstream components. In the dolphins, they had so much iron overloaded in their livers that we used phlebotomy to get the iron drained out of the liver. So be able to pull that iron overload out of the liver and then supplement them with C15, increase their dietary C15. That stopped the cause of the problem, and they didn't have to do phlebotomy anymore. Prior to that, they were doing phlebotomy, probably once a quarter to be able to manage those cases. So front end fixes, and to be able to help with some of the back end components as well.
Awesome. And you kind of touched on milk thistle a little bit, but how, does it interact with other things like NEC, glutathione? Is there anything to be considered of?
Nothing that we know to be concerned about. Whether or not they're synergistic activities, we don't know. So those studies haven't been done. So wouldn't discourage using them together. And not sure as far as how much more benefit you get from using them together versus just single one of them. So no studies done on that yet.
And then it was interesting. I was looking back at my historical data back when I started this journey before Biocanic, and I was definitely insulin resistant, and you can see just like how elevated my liver enzymes were. So it was pretty funny to see that I was able to kind of reduce all that. But reduce all of that through going on a low carbohydrate diet, which ends up eating more animal fats and protein. And really, for decades, it's been vilified. Don't eat red meat, fat's bad for you. You did touch on a little bit between saturated, unsaturated. So how do you help practitioners kind of reframe the conversation with patients around C15, and then also healthier fats? And what are there other fats that, you do want to avoid?
Yeah, we continue to learn. We think we kind of got it locked, like around fats. Like at first, fats were not considered in the 1920s. Fats were only considered sources of energy and no other benefit at all. And then that's when George and Mildred Burr did their studies in rodents and showed that that ALA, alpha linolenic acid, and linoleic acid were the first two essential fatty acids discovered. So those are, we know. So then we're like, okay, so omegas are good, but then everything else is just meh. And then the 1970s hit, lots of older men dying from heart attacks tied to higher LDL. Higher LDL was tied to higher dietary saturated fat intake. All of a sudden, we had a major villain right on the block, which was saturated fats. So saturated, then it became, okay, polyunsaturated fats are pretty good, especially the omega-3s over omega-6s, which could be pro-inflammatory. And then we've got, but for sure, we know all saturated fats are bad. Now we know that based upon cell-based studies, in vivo efficacy, and large prospective cohort studies, unquestionably, even versus odd-chain saturated fats have opposing effects, especially if you're looking at C15 versus C16. So it's not that we got it wrong, completely wrong about dietary saturated fats and risk, because the higher C16 you have, which is present. And so if we look at dairy fat has 1% of C15. It has about 40% of these pro-inflammatory even chain saturated fats. So when you look at these large prospective cohort studies repeatedly, like there have been not even cohorts, meta-analyses, so multiple studies of prospective cohort studies, and now there are 7 of these, repeatedly show that the higher the amount of total saturated fats and even chain saturated fats, especially C16, the higher that amount, the higher the risk of developing type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Those same studies show that the higher our C15 and C17 levels, the lower the risk of getting type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So how do we solve for that, right? And there's an interesting study by Argavani et al., and it was a crossover clinical trial, and they had healthy adults eat 4 or greater servings a day of full-fat dairy products versus less than 4. And what they showed was that when you ate this high full-fat dairy diet, your C15 levels increased, which we know it would happen. And that increase in C15 level was correlated with improved vascular function. So the vessels specifically became less stiff in just 12 weeks. But the problem was that diet also increased the C16 levels, and the C16 increase in that same study and that same group was associated with an increase in blood pressure. So it's a big reason why the Navy funded us to develop Fatty 15, to develop a pure C15 supplement, initially just for the dolphins, to allow humans to get the pure C15, the benefits of this pure C15, good fat, without the burden of having to compete with much higher amounts of these pro-inflammatory saturated fats. So that's a reason for supplementation. I think it's about balance. I don't avoid dairy fats. I think it's about high quality dairy fats. Cheese is a great source of C15, especially things like pecorino, and dairy fat that comes from cows that eat grass versus corn. They have 50% more C15 in their dairy fat compared to cows that eat corn. So, and we're putting pressure on the industry to say, like, hey, if you can report the amount of C15 in your product, I'm going to buy the one that has the highest amount of C15 in it. So being able to change industry practices and choose smart foods, and then to use supplementation as appropriate to be able to get us to not only not being deficient, but optimizing these levels to be able to lean into C15's longevity enhancing properties, which is super exciting.
Yeah. And then you have an advanced formula available exclusive through healthcare providers. What makes that formula different? Why is it focused on practitioners, and why would they pick between the two?
Yeah. Hey, that was like the perfect tip. It's like we practiced this one, Jeremy. We didn't, by the way. But so the practitioners, the advanced formula extra strength, what we're calling AFEX, Fatty 15 was developed for 2 purposes, and especially for healthcare providers. The first is to help people who are deficient to not be deficient. So not just people who are on the edge. So the average person has 0.2% of C15 in circulation in their cell membrane. Vegans reliably have half of that, which is 0.1%. So, or less. So if you have somebody who is deficient, so like who's actively avoiding dairy fat for whatever reason, the higher dose of C15 is more likely to get them into the non-deficient zone. A good rule of thumb, and this is based upon extensive bioavailability studies with the same pure C15 ingredient in Fatty 15, those have shown that, and these are controlled clinical trials that have been published, that every 100 milligrams of this pure C15 increases your circulating levels by about 0.1%. So, and to show you how meaningful that is, a study published by Schaefer et al. Just 2 months ago showed that for every 0.1% increase in C15, the risk of developing type 2 diabetes decreased by 32%. Every 0.1%, that's every 100 milligrams resulted in this associated benefit. So being able to get those, so 300 milligrams helps you help the patients that have low because they aren't getting C15 through their diet. On the other side, this higher amount of C15 can then, if somebody has a normal level of 0.2, you can get them to the Sardinian longevity zone level of C15. And when we look at Sardinians that live in the blue zone, in the high longevity zone, they have levels that are between 0.4 to 0.6. So they have 2 to 3 times higher levels than the rest of us. That's because that's where they eat pecorino cheese and grass-fed sheep and goats. Don't trust the supplements that say they're coming from grass-fed sheep and goats. Someone heard a podcast that I was on, started marketing, and by the way, it has no C15 in it. We tested it. So it's just, I have to be careful what I say. So getting to that Sardinian zone, they live a lot longer. This is where men are more likely to live to 100 more than any other place on Earth. And they're living longer because they're less likely to die of heart disease. This parallels with multiple prospective cohort meta-analyses showing that the higher the C15, this every dose response, every 0.1% increase from 0.2 to 0.6, every increase that you have in that decreases the risk of developing both type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease in these populations. So to be able to get, first step, don't be deficient so we don't get ferroptosis and cellular fragility syndrome, right? Or this nutritional deficiency that's emerging. The second step is, can we optimize our levels and be able to lean into this kind of the tail end of the curve on the upper end to be closer to those in Sardinia, not just because it's a cute story, but because now there are really robust studies backing that those higher end C15 levels truly can be protective against type 2 diabetes. Heart disease also matches with mechanisms of action. Activating AMPK, inhibiting mTOR are also in those upper realms. So that's why the higher doses of physicians can help supervise their patients and really guide their journey with these higher amounts.
I'm super curious about that clinical trial. So that reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes independent of making any dietary change. The only intervention was the C15.
So to be super clear, thank you for that clarification. So these are prospective cohort studies. So following, a meta-analysis. So following tens of thousands of people over many years. And this is through the C15 levels that they have based upon what they were getting in their diet. So Stay tuned for the supplement studies. There was a study done in Singapore, which was a randomized controlled clinical trial using supplement C15, pure C15 supplementation at 300 mg per day among women who had fatty liver disease. And that one did show that it helped to lowered their LDL cholesterol. So we're seeing hints as clinical trials start coming in, but it's really hard to do an RCT for nutrients that help support healthy growth and development, because we're not going to withhold C15 from babies intentionally and see if they get a deficiency syndrome. And it's also hard to say, hey, group A takes C15 supplementation, group B don't, and let's see over the next 20 to 30 years whether or not you develop type 2 diabetes or heart disease. There's a lot of exciting analyses or methods now using real world data that the FDA is increasingly supporting, that we can use these prospective cohort observational studies if they were collected in a rigorous enough way that they could be what's called emulated clinical trials. So we can move from association to causation for these types of studies. So stay tuned, Jeremy, then we'll be back on, then I'll be able to say, yep, caused it.
Awesome. And then you touched on this briefly earlier, but can C15 levels actually be directly tested? And then if a practitioner wants to establish a baseline before starting Fatty 15, what does that look like? What is the baseline panel that you would run?
Right. So I would run, so C15 levels, yes, they can be tested. So fatty acid panels should include C15. So if you use Quest, go bug them because they don't have C15 on there and there's no reason for them to not include it. Let's see, who uses it? Genova Diagnostics includes C15 in their NutriVal panel. And then we worked with them and they developed an at-home blood spot test for C15. But because your healthcare practitioners recommend that you do something that's where C15 is included in a full fatty acid panel so that you can get all that data along with their CBC and chem. So what you'll get back is typically a % of C15 among total fatty acids. It's also helpful to have concentration. But if you're stuck with just the percentage, then you can use that 0.2% as kind of, this is the middle of the road of where most people are. The middle does not mean that that's healthy, because remember, the reason why we're in this state is because it's shifted right down lower, because population-wide we've decreased our intake of C15. So even though they're right in the middle, does not mean healthy. You're right on the edge and precipice of these fragile red blood cells. So if they're at 0.2%, if they're below it, then those are red warning signs. Get them supplementation to get up and over 0.2. If they're every step you can get them away and higher from 0.2 gets you off that edge of the cliff, and then better, healthier and healthier into this longevity zone, especially with regard to cardiometabolic health. So you can take their initial C15 reading. You could then be able to dose them appropriately. Again, every 100 milligrams of C15 is expected to increase their C15 levels by 0.1%. Give them 3 months to be able to incorporate that, 3 to 6 months if needed, and then you can tailor the dosing from there. People love taking this pill. We don't have to talk about it, but there was a delight and surprise that people do feel benefits. Science caught up to why, but because of results that they're seeing at their doctor's office, because a lot of them are sleeping better and feeling better, that we have a 95% monthly retention rate on Fatty 15 customers. And the only way that happens is if people are feeling the benefits and or truly believe in it. So it's an intervention that you can introduce to your patients that they are very likely to adhere to, especially if you're giving them positive feedback on their health.
Awesome. And just to kind of finish off that point, so you said Quest does not have a fatty acid, does LabCorp?
LabCorp does not. I can't remember who we're working. Just take a look, see if they have C15. If they don't, tell them you want it. And it's this exact same methodology of all of the omegas and everything else that they're measuring. It's not a heavy lift for them to add C15 to that list.
Okay. Awesome. And then last question before we change over to the Q&A. You built over 100 peer-reviewed studies around this research. For practitioners that want to go deeper into the science, where do you point them first? That's obviously a big lift to go through 100 studies. And looking ahead, what is the research showing us that the long-term impact of correcting C15 deficiency, but you think that functional practice should have on their radar right now?
Yeah, so we needed a place to put all the science, and because so much of the science is geared around diseases, preventing, managing, and treating diseases, which is not what supplements are intended to do, we created a site called discoverc15.com. You go there, and specifically you go to the resources page. That's on the top tab. And that is where we put all of the peer-reviewed studies, links to all the peer-reviewed studies. One new study on C15 benefits is being published on average per week over the last year, or plus, even more. So we put the new publications in there. It's divided. If you scroll down to the bottom of that page, it's divided by category. So you can look at cancer, metabolism, longevity, reproduction, infant health, baby health. So you can pick your category of interest, and that will have a list. Simon & Schuster reached out. So I have a blog, Sunday blog that I put out sharing the latest science on C15. Simon & Schuster reached out and said, Steph, will you write a book? And I was like, well, the science isn't done yet. And they just laughed, because they're like, yeah, the science is never going to be done. Seems like you have enough to write a book. So it's called The Longevity Nutrient. Paperback just came out last week. So you can get that wherever books are sold. And that really can serve as as it's really a great textbook resource on summarizing the science around C15 deficiencies. And it is meant to be for really physicians to be able to have access to the science, use the index in the back to be able to see what it is that you're looking up specifically for your patients. And it also holds coffee mugs on top.
Well, this has been a great discussion so far, and I want to make sure we get to our audience questions. So thanks to everybody that's been posting. We'll get to as many as we can. And if you happen to be watching this as a replay, feel free to post your questions. We'll make sure to get those questions answered by Dr. Steph here later on. So first question, how do you help practitioners navigate that conversation without undermining dietary guidance, their client who have cut out animal proteins since C15 comes from dairy fat?
Yeah, I think, we don't want to make our patients feel bad or guilty about their choices, especially since it's not like, even though the revised dietary guidelines just came out and flipped the pyramid upside down, we were happy to see dairy fat on top. I'm not sure about the big steak on top of that. We could all have conversations about, it's all about balance, of course. So I think you can go about this in a pretty innocuous way, which is just like, oh, hey, gosh, it looks like, you might be low in C15, kind of like the vitamin B12 story, right? That if people aren't eating meat or if they're vegan, they're going to be deficient in vitamin B12 and they don't need to feel badly about it. It just is a part of their dietary choice. So this could be a standard part of your panel where you're going to measure, it's like, let's take your C15 levels, or you could always just put them on C15 supplementation and see how they respond. We have a 95% retention rate from consumers, not because they went and got tested, right? So they're feeling the benefits without having to get tested. But this group of healthcare practitioners, it sure would be nice. It's nice to be able to get that reading. So then once they see like, oh, I'm low, or oh, I'm in the middle and I want it, then you can talk about what their goals are. Is it, well, first, let's make sure you're not deficient. If you're able to point to, listen, your red blood cell distribution width is increasing, RDW is a fascinating biomarker, which is increasingly showing, if you just go on Google Scholar, PubMed, and you do RDW, fascinating research and tons of it being published. It is one of the strongest biomarkers of biological age. So the higher the RDW, the more variable our red blood cell size, hence more fragile our red blood cells. That is an indicator of our biological age. So you can even go about it like, looks like we're seeing some markers of some accelerated biological aging here. Let's get your C15 levels. I see your RD. I see you have maybe your ferritin's a little high. Let's go ahead and get that. And if it's low, you can just head them towards supplementation. If they also don't want to pair that with that. And I will add one more thing, fiber. So fiber can help, at least in mouse models. Fiber has inulin. Inulin is then used by specific microbes in our gut that then use that inulin to make some amounts of C15. So there are, in addition to supplementation, for people who don't eat whole fat dairy, there are ways to get slight bumps. It's not enough to get up and over, but every bit counts. So another reason to be a fiber fan.
Yeah. All right, next question. The research suggests C15 supports healthy growth and cognitive development in children. For practitioners who work with pediatric clients or families, how should they think about C15 as a part of a functional nutritional conversation? Are there specific developmental windows where it matters the most?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting field now because you like I said, you can't do the randomized clinical trials in children. But what you can do has been done, right? So pregnant mice are fed a full diet absent of essential fatty acids, including C15. They then have babies that are, when they're born, they have poor growth, AKA have a nutritional deficiency. So this is basically repeating what George and Mildred Burr did to discover the first two essential fatty acids. And when those poor growing neonates are born, they then, when they're fed just C15, the normal body growth restores. Same thing happened with nematodes of C. elegans. They deprived the post-embryonic C. elegans of all nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, all nutrients, and they go into a hibernating state. When they gave it just C15, nothing else, they returned to normal growth and normal neuronal development. Just C15, no other, like, it's mind blowing. They did it with C17 and it didn't work. So there's not much. And then we have what I shared about with the prospective cohort studies in humans. There's not much more we can do at this point for the young. So we also know that moms, because they're eating less C15, they have about half the amount of C15 in their breast milk than they used to have 30 years ago. And infant formula, most infant formulas have no C15 in them unless they have full fat dairy in the infant formula. So we are now looking at generations of kids that have been born into a relatively C15 deficient world. So that was a long way of saying, Jeremy, of yes, finding ways to integrate C15 into the pregnancy state. Really fascinating studies showing in mice that C15 helps with placental vascularization, which actually then helps the placenta absorb all nutrients from mom and get them to her fetus. So for part of a pregnancy protocol, and then once a baby is born, the C15 supplement is for 1 year old and up. The way for baby to get it is for mom to get C15. And the more cheese she eats specifically, the higher her C15 in her breast milk. So having this, helping them on their journey of getting those C15 levels up for moms in their circulation, because that gets to the fetus. And then after the baby's born in her milk, all you're doing is repeating where we were at before we've seen these generations come in that are now 30 years old. And what are we seeing in 30-year-olds? Just increase again in these, aging associated diseases. And they're far too young to be getting it. And if C15 deficiency is playing any role in this, we have an ability to really help at the youngest stage.
I guess kind of building on that, and is there any overdose? Can you overdo it on C15? Like, what are the downsides potentially? Or is it just one of those things that your body will absorb what you need and excrete the rest?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't seen a toxic dose. And the standard studies that are done in rodents have been done where you push it to be 100 times more than the dose that you're giving people. Especially if it's going to be a food ingredient, because you can't control how much food, like if it's in chips, right. You can't control how many chips they eat. So, and they haven't found a toxic level yet. So I do think it's like you said, it's like your body will absorb the amount that it needs and then it'll kick it out. The other thing is the dosing we're talking about with supplementation is basically mimicking how much we used to get and or incremental amounts that, again, doesn't even get above. It's to reach where people in Sardinia have, not to have 10 times higher than Sardinians. We're just really trying to mimic what nature has intended for C15. Babies, on the healthy growing babies, they were getting an average of about 100 milligrams of C15 from mom. So even babies are still looking at this, 100 to 200 milligrams per day. At the earliest age. So maybe they need more per body weight because it's contributing to growth and neuronal development.
Yeah. All right. Last question before we need to wrap up. When it comes to shifting gears a little bit, when it comes to perimenopause or menopause, where hormonal shifts are already affecting metabolic and liver function, is there emerging research on how C15 interacts with the hormonal landscape and whether the supplementation may be especially relevant during that stage?
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, you talk about a time of accelerated aging. It's menopause, so estrogen levels drop, and you're on the massive downside roller coaster of aging. I experienced that myself, and women, we do great, and the men are just aging from 30 on, and we're doing pretty well. And then when menopause hits, we catch up with you men with regard to risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes and everything else. So with regard to menopause, I think where C15 may be playing a role, and there have not been formal studies, so just to be completely transparent, is being able to address the reason why menopause and postmenopause are so difficult is because of this accelerated aging that's happening with the drop in estrogen. So C15, with its ability to really tap into, and we didn't go into detail about it, multiple longevity, right, anti-aging, lower, younger biological age pathways. By doing so, it's helping to combat the effects of accelerated aging effects of menopause. Me, myself, I was taking one pill a day of fatty 15. I was doing great. Menopause hit. I started getting tennis elbow. I don't play tennis. My hips started hurting. Sleep sucked. I was up at 2 a.m. every morning. And I said, well, gosh, it can't hurt. So I moved to 2 pills a day. And no joke, Jeremy, I'm not kidding. Joint pain completely disappeared. I'm sleeping like a baby. And we've had multiple customers report these similar types of benefits and this sleep benefit, mood benefit, and decreased joint pain, all tied a lot to, there's a whole piece of the puzzle of endocannabinoids where C15 helps to maximize or support healthy endocannabinoid and dopamine levels. We published that work last year. So those are, we call those delights and surprises versus the primary reason to buy it. But boy, getting a good night's sleep, I think is probably a good reason why a lot of people stay on Fatty 15.
Yeah. Well, listen, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank everybody who joined us and asked questions. Like I said, if you're watching this as a replay, you can post in the comments, and we'll make sure to get those questions over to Dr. Steph. Thanks for joining us so much today. So where can people find out more about Fatty 15, your research, and C15 overall?
Great. So fatty15.com, got to go there to go learn more about the supplement. Encourage you to go to discoverc15.com. And we do have, fatty15.com clinic. That's where you want to go for as a healthcare practitioner. And I know that you all will be sharing that to be able to sign up, get an account, and access to our advanced formula extra strength for specifically limited to physicians. To provide, go to discoverc15.com for all the latest on C15 research. And then longevity, the longevity nutrient by yours truly, available wherever books are sold for a fun read, or you can just listen to my voice for 9 hours as if this wasn't enough and get the audiobook.
Awesome. That's definitely my route, but awesome. Well, thanks for joining us live. Make sure you hit subscribe and so you never miss one of our live streams coming up in April. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Steph.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jeremy.
Bye.